Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of congregational humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome.
Each week when we gather, we light our chalice and share one of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism, or one of the aspirations of our congregation. This week we light the chalice remembering our aspiration to support one another's journey toward meaning and connection in the here and now.
Now for our congregational covenant. Love is the spirit of this place, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning. I'm Allison Wyeth, Director of Religious Education, and this morning I'd like to take a little time to recognize and thank all the volunteers who help make the religious education program at FUS happen. Each volunteer with our youth deserves tremendous love, care, affection, and respect. We all should acknowledge the importance of these generous people in the life of this community. RE volunteers are the strongest of pillars on which our program is built. They spend their time building beloved community with our children. In a typical year, they show up when the weather deters many. This year, they showed up during a pandemic when there were so many reasons they might not have done. They managed the usual fits of giggles and wiggles, but also the dreaded, your mic is off, and oops, I forgot to stop screen sharing. They served as sounding boards and guides to youth as we weathered and processed a mind-bending year of loss, grief, and change. And they gently encouraged our children and our youth to expand their ideas and understandings of how to be fully and courageously human in a complex world. And they did it all in a changing, Zoom-based, unpredictable virtual setting where they built human connection in spite of it all. I'd like to recognize the following folks who moved forward this year to take on virtual RE, and to recognize our tested and capable RE committee who've helped guide us through it all. So let's each of us send a thought of deep gratitude to those good folks who help make a place for all ages in this community. And let's thank them for truly understanding the wise words, there are no other people's children.
You can play the game or you can con the game.
Since our founding in 1881, members and friends' support of First Unitarian Society has been essential for our ongoing mission. Our Sunday assemblies, community celebrations, cultural enrichment, and work in social justice come to you with the hard work of our dedicated staff and volunteers. Your contributions will help assure the continuing work of First Unitarian Society. Give now at PayPal, the Give Plus app, or firstunitarian.org/donate. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. We know we had some audio problems this morning, so we are double checking a new system right now. All right, we got a green light to keep going. Thanks for your patience, everybody. It's now time for our Joys and Sorrows meditation. On Sundays, when we gather, we take a few minutes to reflect on the joys, sorrows, and milestones of the human experience. We do this so that we stay in touch with our own humanity. We do this to remind ourselves of the value of a moment of stillness. And we do this so that no one among us is alone, either in celebrating joy or in facing the burdens of life. This morning, we send our good wishes and our gratitude to all those who are showing up in northern Minnesota in solidarity with Indigenous tribes to protest the Line 3 pipeline project. At least 2 FUS members and our own Reverend Kelly Clement are part of the multi-faith delegation of treaty people who believe that this project is a desecration of the natural world and of land sacred to tribes, and people who know that humanity's future requires a drastic reduction in carbon extraction and emissions. We are grateful for the commitment of time and effort these water protectors are making. May they amplify the voices of reason, science, and community, and may all safely return home. Also this morning, we have a couple of updates from members of our congregational community. One update is from FUS members Wayne Groff and Jim Dryden, who are in North Dakota to spend precious time helping care for Wayne's mom, Opal, as she receives home hospice care. Opal is 97 years old, and this picture of her seated at a table with pen and paper was taken yesterday after she got up and decided she had a few more things to write down. Wayne says that Opal has been out to enjoy the vegetable and flower gardens tended to by his sister, and Jim reports that Opal has kept him busy playing her favorite hymns on his accordion. We send our love and support to Wayne and Jim in these tender days. And we have a big joy today from the family of Kay Abbott. Kay, who has been a member of FUS for more than 4 decades, turned 100 years old on Friday. Kay is a lover of nature, as evidenced by this photo of her amid greenery large and small. And she is known around the congregation for her longtime commitment to activism and for showing up to demonstrations to bring about change. And as many of you know, Kay is in good spirits and health, and she has attended numerous events online over the past year. From all of us at FUS, happy birthday, Kay. We now take a moment of silence to reflect on all the challenges and heartbreak going on in our lives and in our world. And with gratitude, we think of all those who are leading lives of justice, service, and compassion. Let us now share a moment of silence.
Me to begin by saying thank you to our amazing tech team. It does take a village, and we have some amazing volunteers in our village. Things have been going okay today so far, but we're doing a shakedown cruise for the next few weeks before we open for business so that everyone can come back into our building, we're hoping. Also, I do want to say, a very special birthday shout out to Kay Abbott, 100 years old today. Happy birthday. Well, I'm going to be working from my cell phone today, so I hope I can read that, but we'll see. Our theme for June is play, and play in its many different manifestations. Today, I want to talk about the rules of games. I want to consider the concept of games in a wide context. Mostly, I want to examine how not knowing the rules of the game can be debilitating. First, take a light example. It's getting warm here in Minnesota, and the other afternoon, my wife Teresa and I were out for a walk. Teresa mentioned that in many cultures, carrying a parasol to block UV rays is common and accepted. Here in the US, it's eccentric and a little weird. Now, where did that rule come from? The word itself says what a parasol is actually for. Para is against, and sol is sun. Parasols are about keeping out the sun, not the rain. But what about umbrella? Umbra is Latin for shadow. Ella is a diminutive, and umbrella is a little shadow, which is not something you need to carry around in the rain. But there you go when the sun is very intense. Where did that rule in US culture come from? How come carrying around a little shade is quaint and eccentric? Rules, they're always there in human relations and human societies. Sometimes we know about them, and sometimes we don't. So, a personal example. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian household. That meant a whole litany of things, including, for one, playing cards was not allowed in our house. Of the devil, my family said. As a matter of fact, playing cards were called the devil's picture book. So I wasn't allowed to play cards when I was a kid, and consequently, when I went away to college, I didn't know any rules of any card games. Well, just learn, right? But do you realize how many card games there are when you don't know any and have never even seen cards before? I struggled to learn the rules of card games with my new friends. What's a suit? What's a ace? What's it mean to have jokers wild? I was clueless about all of those things. Well, Rev Jim read this morning from Susanna Crossman in the welcome, saying, for group play to function, everyone must feel safe to play. Now, social rules are often unstated, and that's where the unsafety comes from. Often even unnoticed go the rules by people who enforce them or by those who are accidentally breaking them. As someone who comes from a culture of poor farmers, I learned almost subconsciously that I needed to watch the unspoken rules of the American middle class very carefully because we didn't know those rules. It is the little things. In my culture, for example, people don't look each other in the eye. That's considered aggressive. We even have this American phrase, I looked him straight in the eye. It's about aggression, right? And we just don't do that in my hillbilly culture. A big challenge for me has always been the American middle class propensity to express confidence no matter what. Where I come from, it's considered prideful to say you're good at something. For example, if someone says, "Hey, I hear you're a master chef," the right answer is, "Oh, yeah, I can cook a little." The majority culture makes fun of that propensity by calling it the aw shucks attitude. Aw shucks, that ain't good. Well, aw shucks is not something we say in the Ozarks. I've never heard anybody say that in the Ozarks. It's a way of denigrating people who shuck corn because we don't know the rules of the game. The rules of one culture jar up against the rules of another culture. And where I come from, if you express great confidence, as in, "Well, I would never do that," the answer is, "You're born, but you ain't dead." Meaning, it is the height of pridefulness to assume what you would do given certain circumstances. You might do just about anything because, after all, you're born, but you ain't dead. Now, given the fact that 85% of Americans lie on their resumes, where does that leave people from the cultures like mine? In other words, unspoken social rules among dominant social groups make people feel like outsiders, and unspoken social rules make people in dominant groups outsiders somehow. I just don't get the rules of this game. If I come into a job interview and don't look you in the eye and don't express confidence that I can do the job, am I going to get the job? Okay, here's another example. Candidates going into Unitarian Universalist ministry have to get a psychological evaluation. Now, not just any psychological evaluation, but a particular one. So everything is standardized. I noticed as I took the test that several of the questions had to do with hearing voices, the voice of God, the voices of the dead. Where I come from, expressing things as if God is speaking is very, very common. We don't use the word God because that's considered, it's kind of very dangerous to say, but we'll say something like, "Well, I was just standing there and the good Lord told me," or something like that. Or you can talk about the dead like that. "I heard my mama, Lord bless her soul," which also means she's dead, Lord bless her soul. "I heard my mama just as plain as day saying, 'Don't you do that now.'" It's just a way that we express ourselves. Well, when I took that psychological evaluation, I knew the proper white middle class answer to the questions. You're not supposed to hear God or the dead speaking. So I got those questions right, but they are unspoken rules. Unitarian Universalists express great dismay at why people of different groups don't want to be Unitarian Universalists. I suspect the answer is far more about those unspoken rules than it is about any kind of the beliefs that we have. Many people visit Unitarian Universalist congregations and realize fairly quickly that they don't know the rules of the game. They aren't part of the group. I'm just talking about my own personal experience here. You may have had some of those experiences. As someone who came into the Unitarian Universalist fold from the working class, I just had to adjust. For example, among UUs, sharing your feelings is one of those big deals. You're supposed to share your feelings. Let's all be honest with each other. But here's the thing. There are rules to the game of sharing your feelings. You can only share certain kinds of feelings, and you have to say some feelings and not other feelings. And I learned very early on in my UU experience that my reactions, my natural reactions weren't acceptable. Why are you laughing at that? That's not funny. Why are you smiling at that? There's nothing to smile about. Well, we hillbillies are very cynical people. We don't think anything is ever going to go right. we have a very dark sense of humor. So our natural reactions are wrong. Oh, well, what do you do when you're in that place? Well, you don't say, hey, my cultural norms just don't agree with yours. No, you don't. You don't do that. Or I don't anyway. What I do is disassociate and I withdraw. And I say that I don't like sharing my feelings. I'm not withdrawing from sharing feelings. However, I am withdrawing from those unspoken rules that say what I can and can't say, that say my feelings are wrong. Now, I'm saying all this not to be saying, oh, poor, pitiful me. I'm just pointing out that, hey, I'm a Euro-American heterosexual male, so I can fairly easily fit into the dominant culture of Unitarian Universalism. It doesn't take all that much adjustment for me to disappear into the woodwork. After all, I got an education eventually, and I got a professional job, and I can express myself fairly well. But think about people who can't for all kinds of different reasons, people who can't disappear into the white woodwork of Unitarian Universalism. I'm very good at saying, just pretend I'm not here. That's a very hillbilly way of doing it. But some people see that as hypocrisy and can't allow themselves to do that and live up to those rules of the game. Now, I know that each of us have our own rules. There are subjective rules that we live by, but there are also the rules that we learn according to our social locations. And then when we find ourselves in various spaces, we naturally adjust those. But we have to remember, I think, that there are invisible rules, and we do need to be very careful about how we express the rules of the game to those who maybe don't understand. Again, I was lucky. W.E.B. Du Bois coined the term double consciousness to describe the experience of African Americans in white spaces. Du Bois pointed out that African Americans experience this challenge as they process the knowledge that Euro-Americans are judging them all the time and finding their expectations not met and therefore judging people. And so it's a double mirror going back and forth, back and forth. Now, again, I was lucky. Despite my social class, I could disappear into that dominant white culture. But that's not what we want of Unitarian Universalism. A very old discussion in Unitarian circles has been the question of whether or not the movement could go beyond the neighborhood of Boston, as we used to say. This is still a question, and perhaps it's the question of Unitarian Universalism, because the neighborhood of Boston is not a geographical space anymore. It is a mental space, because Boston nowadays is a multicultural city, but the Boston that Unitarianism comes from was not a multicultural city. The rules of that Boston Unitarianism set a very high standard on education, professional achievement, public service, etiquette, a disinterested debate, intellectualized discussions, self-confident individuality, what used to be called refinements and culture, which all were code words for very Euro-American, very white WASP. Now, humanism has unfortunately now taken on many of the trappings of that Boston neighborhood. Many of the rules of the Unitarian Universalist game have entered into humanism. But we do need to remind ourselves that humanism is not from the neighborhood of Boston, but from the Midwest. Actually, humanism was immediately and viciously opposed by the East Coast Unitarian elite, what at that time was called the humanist controversy. Well, it wasn't a controversy for the humanists. It was a controversy for the Unitarians who had their theology degrees from Harvard. What were a couple of Midwesterners, John Dietrich and Curtis Reese, doing wading into liberal theology when everybody knew that you had to be from the neighborhood of Boston and have a Harvard degree in order to do that? After all, Reese and Dietrich had started out as ministers in outre religions. Dietrich was from Minneapolis, Reese was from Des Moines. These were places with new immigrants, Scandinavians, Germans. They just weren't up to that WASP level of the neighborhood of Boston, the Brahmins, the Blue Bloods, the Beacon Hill place where the Unitarian headquarters sat. Questioning the Christian tradition and the Protestant God of the Unitarians and the Universalists, which they saw, I think, as being the backbone of America, maybe. Well, that was just against the rules, saying that pedestrian, plodding, workmanlike science explained more than those high soaring theologies from Harvard just wasn't acceptable. It was breaking the rules. Roasting sacred cows is not an activity for the well-bred in the neighborhood of Boston, after all. I think humanists do well to remember our roots, and I, for one, would never have become a Unitarian Universalist if it hadn't been for that humanist strain, because the Boston God didn't make any more sense to me than my Ohio River Valley God that I grew up with. But wait a minute, okay? I think you're probably seeing a contradiction at this place because reflect for a moment that I've been talking about how we human beings create and conform to rules that then exclude people. But isn't that a paradox? Because one of the main things we human beings want is to be together, isn't it? I think that's the starkest thing that we learned in the pandemic is people like being together, and actually we suffer when we're not. So why do we set up these rules for each other and against each other, exclusion and inclusion? Well, unfortunately, we create both ways to be together and ways to be apart. But what's up with that? In many ways, we so desperately want to be with other human beings, yet somehow we want them to be just like us. We want people who understand us, talk like us, think like us. Well, that's maybe good for a softball team or a bowling league, but it's not good for a congregation. That's not our purpose. Last week I was answering questions about FUS and how we really want diversity. We even have a Moving Towards Equity team tasked with helping us find ways to be more open and diverse. It's one of our main aspirations. We really strive for that. And one way we can get there is by calling out our own unstated rules. That's what a culture is, after all. It's a set of rules, many of which are unstated. As an old Midwestern farmer, allow me to close by saying what I think is the most damaging of Unitarian Universalist rules of the game. And actually, I think it goes right back to those Puritans in the neighborhood of Boston. It's the propensity to confess to being the greatest of sinners and then asserting that somehow miraculously I am hugely forgiven, and therefore the greatest of sinners has now become the most redeemed of sinners, and therefore I used to be wrong, but guess what? Now I am so very, very right all the time. Now, I still think like a Pentecostal, and our view is that goes back to that old saying, you're born, but you ain't dead. Those mistakes just keep on coming as human beings. We don't get to some kind of plateau in which we are saved from ourselves and suddenly become all-knowing. We need to remember that, I'm not the greatest sinner. I'm just kind of a mundane sinner, I think. I invite us all, as a matter of fact, to forget about that sin and forgiveness thing. We only need, I believe, the grace and the gumption to keep on trying, failing, and then trying again and failing better. So may it be. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. All these we carry in our hearts and in our minds until we are together again.
Let's deal.
On a warm summer's eve, on a train bound for nowhere, I met up with a gambler. We were both too tired to speak, so we took turns staring out the window at the darkness till boredom overtook us, and he began to speak. He said, "Son, I've made a life out of reading people's faces, knowing what the cards were by the way they held their eyes. So if you don't mind me saying, I can see you're out of aces. For a taste of your whiskey, I give you some advice." So I handed him my bottle, and he drank down my last swallow. Well, then he bummed a cigarette and asked me for a light. I got deathly quiet, and his face lost all expression. If you're gonna play the game, boy, you got to learn to play it right. Well, you got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, know when to walk away, and know when to run. Well, you never count your money. When you're sitting at the table, there'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done. Every gambler knows that the secret to surviving is knowing what to throw away, knowing what to keep. 'Cause every hand's a winner and every hand's a loser, and the best that you can hope for is to die in your sleep. And when he finished speaking, he turned back toward the window, brushed out his cigarette, and faded off to sleep. Somewhere in the darkness, the gambler, he broke even. But in his final words, I found an ace that I could keep. You got to know when to hold 'em, I know when to fold 'em, I know when to walk away, I know when to run. You never count your money. When you're sitting at the table, there'll be time enough for counting when the dealing's done, when the dealing's done. When the dealing's, read 'em and weep.
Thanks for bearing with us today as we work out the bugs, shakedown cruise, and begin to work on ways of reopening First Unitarian Society and still sharing our humanist message with a wider audience. Thanks so much for stopping by today. Our closing words are by Maya Angelou from her poem, Continue. My wish for you is that you continue. Continue to be who and how you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. Continue to dare to love deeply and risk everything for the good thing. Continue to float happily in the sea of infinite substance which set aside riches for you before you had a name. Continue. Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.